Hey guys, Tech here and welcome back. Today I'm just going to be doing a real quick build video for a customer's gun that I just finished up. Now this gun is a G&G ARP 5.56 and we were turning it into a close quarters airsoft gun. So about 330 FPS with a .25 was the build requirement, reaching out to about 370, 380, 390 FPS with a .20 gram BB. And then he wanted a high rate of fire and a really good trigger response. He also wanted a gun that was really reliable. So all those things together, it's a very specific set of requirements. So I built the gun for that and we're gonna talk about that today. So we'll just go over the externals real quick. I really didn't do anything to the externals, but the customer, almost said patient, that is my other full-time job, but the customer wanted, had this mock suppressor installed on the gun when I received it. The inner barrel length he wanted way out to the suppressor, so we have a 247 millimeter length inner barrel that goes up to there, and then other than that, externally not much else is done. I did swap out the bolt catch for a retro arms bolt catch and a retro arms CNC trigger. Both of those are really nice. I really like the look of them on this gun. Gives it just a slightly different look than the stock parts do. This bolt catch is kind of loosely in there. Now it hangs totally fine while the receivers are meshed. It's not gonna fall out. It physically cannot fall out while it's in the receiver like that. But once you split your receivers, this can easily just kind of slide out. So that's that. Just pay attention to that. And really that's about it externally. I think the customer also has a battery extension over here. Pretty darn necessary for a gun like this where it's just so tight and compact. So yeah, let's move on to the internals. All right, so moving on to the internals, we will start out with the inner barrel and the hop-up chamber. So for this setup, I went with a Prometheus rotary style hop-up chamber and Lonex 70-degree hop-up bucking, my own cut R-hop patch, a ZCI 6.02 247 millimeter length inner barrel. It is steel. I've polished the inside and the outside. The outside polishing is just for looks really shiny, it's really smooth, it's really cool to look at. And the inside is very immaculate. It just looks great. So that's the polishing work I did there. That's the whole barrel work I did there. So sometimes I end up using O-rings. This time I used the spring to space the hop-up chamber to the gearbox shell. It's a really stiff spring, so I don't think it's gonna have any problem keeping it pushed up against the gearbox shell. I'm not noticing any FPS inconsistency issues, so this is working fine, it seems. Sometimes I use O-rings, sometimes I use springs. This time the spring worked fine. So let's move on to the gearbox internals. All right, so on to the gearbox internals. Obviously, I kept the G&G stock shell. Now, sometimes these shells can be fairly weak. G&G, that is one of their downfalls, so they do make fairly weak gearbox shells, with exception to their Pro line lineup, which this is a Pro line internal gearbox shell. So it's fairly strong. It's not going to be a problem, especially with this setup. It'll be okay. Their Pro line gearbox shells are solid. Their combat machine and their sport line models tend to have very weak and brittle gearbox shells. Also this gearbox shell, it being G&G, they're very good at making their parts fit together very well. So there's no spec issues here. There's no receiver pullback towards the rear. There's no spec issues between the gearbox shell, the lower receiver, and the grip. Everything fits really well together and lines up as it should. So really the only thing I did to the gearbox shell was just radius it, because the radiusing that G&G does is very poor. They actually don't take off that edge step. They just kind of radius the outside windows of the gearbox shell, which is not how you radius. So that's one thing I did to the gearbox shell, and then we kept it stock. Other parts, obviously, I went with a SHS air seal nozzle here. I went with a ZCI full cylinder. Did that because dual creep is a lot more fun than to not dual creep. And so went with an SHS piston. I did end up lightening the piston significantly just because this is a speed build. And then I went with a Garter SP120. I short stroked the piston by 2 teeth. And I also short stroked the SHS 13:1 ratio gear set. I have SHS 8mm bushings. I have a ZCI 16 TPA motor with a Gate Aster basic version. I have the basic programming in it. I have a pretty short trigger pull programmed for it because this is a close quarters gun, semi-auto only kind of concept. I do think the customer can play full auto, but I can't remember exactly. It doesn't really matter. Regardless, it is a fast trigger response kind of build, so I built a trigger to match for it. And that's pretty much all the parts we have installed. Obviously, it's wired to Dean's with that battery extender back there. Couple things, as you can see, I have this retro arms trigger here, Gate Aster. You guys know you don't need have a physical safety barrier, like a safety bar, when you are running an electronic MOSFET like the gate Aster, because it has a programmed electronic safety. Well, I really like physical safeties and electronic safeties, so I just use them both. And that's something really cool the gate Aster allows you to do, is that there's plenty of room for that bar to clear over the trigger board. And so in semi, you're pulling the trigger, shooting the gun, flip it to safe because you're done. There's absolutely no resistance going there, and then you get a hard safety. So that's super cool. I like that. It's an extra detail that some people don't pay attention to that I try to pay attention to. And yeah, that's pretty much all that we did for the build. It's working really well, and let's take it to the chrono and see how it shoots. Before we take it to the chrono, we'll just show off the trigger response and the rate of fire real quick. I've got the gun plugged up to a pretty healthy size, the 11 volt LiPo battery. Obviously this is not really going to fit in the gun, but if the customer wanted to run a battery pouch, this would be a more than appropriate battery to run. So safety, obviously nothing. Headphone user warning. I am wearing my microphone that tends to exacerbate the sound of airsoft guns. So here we go. Semi, really nice and snappy, full auto. As you can see, it's a very loud gun, it's a very snappy gun. It sounds really, really good. Shooting about maybe just shy of 40 RPS, about 36, 37 maybe. Pretty fast gun, but it should hold up just fine. So now let's take it to the chrono. Alright guys, as you can see, the gun is shooting about 310, 315 FPS with a 0.28 gram BB, so that's pretty hot for a close quarters gun, but that is what the customer wanted. That is what he said his field allows him to use, so I'm more than happy to build him a gun capable of doing that. The gun does shoot pretty fast, about 36, 37, maybe 38 rounds per second, so it is flying in the speed category for an SSG. I haven't built an SSG that shot this fast in a long time, because typically I tend to build DSGs when they shoot this fast, but SSGs are just as capable in this regard, so that's what we built. I would recommend getting some really nice magazines for this kind of gun, just because, especially if you're using 0.28s or 0.32 gram BBs, at this kind of rate of fire, your magazines are going to have a tough time keeping up. Even if the gun is built for that kind of speed and is very capable of feeding at that kind of speed, your magazines have to be capable of feeding those heavy BBs at that kind of speed. So semi-auto, it might work totally fine, but if your magazines are a little bit weak in the spring category, then they might not push those 0.32s into that chamber every single shot. So something to keep in mind, invest in good magazines. Everybody should, even if you're not running a super high-speed gun like this. Alright guys, that's going to have to do it for this quick video. Thank you very much for watching, and as usual, like, comment, and subscribe. It really goes a long way to helping my channel grow, and when you comment down below, tell me what you think of this build. Tell me what you think about high-speed SSGs, 40 RPS SSGs versus the 40 RPS DSG. Personally, I really like the 40 RPS DSG, but I kind of really like this high-speed SSG as well. The trigger response is phenomenal with that gate Aster, and I can program however whatever sensitivity I want for that trigger. So shoots really fast, cycles really clean, and it sounds really good, as it is fairly over-volumed. Again, thank you very much for watching. That's gonna have to do it for this video. I will see you guys in the next video of whatever the heck I'm doing next. But until then, stay tuned, techs.